Welcome to the Outcast Creative Channel. Sorry, we are running slightly late, couple of minutes late. It is time for another industry interview. In fact, it's industry interview number 73. Now, I've got a special co-host with me tonight as well, who's largely responsible for this interview happening. But before I bring anyone in, let's have a look at some of the work of the fantastic cinematographer that is Roy H. Wagner. I'm just going to bring that up on the screen now. And this reel is available for you to watch on YouTube in its entirety. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. So if people want to check it out afterwards, it is all there. But do check it out. But let's have a look at a little bit of it right now. Amazing stuff. Let's stop that there.
We talk to the legends of the creative and entertainment industries. We talk to those on the rise. Lance Dean Anthony Nielsen asks about the highs, the lows, and everything in between. This is Outcast Creative, and this is Industry Interviews.
Fantastic stuff. There's Wayne. Wayne Byrne, biographer to the stars, some might say. You've written many books about all kinds of people that have influenced your life, I guess, growing up. And one of those was the person who was the DOP on the film Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Warriors, the third film in the franchise. Let's bring in Roy H. Wagner, who shot that movie, among many other things, 96 other credits on IMDb, an incredibly impressive and very diverse CV. Everything from big budget feature films, established television series, to crazy independent movies. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
What I'm going to do is fire a load of quick fire questions at you just to get some sense of your own upbringing, the kinds of films and things that influenced you when you were younger. No right or wrong answers here. It really is just about your own personal experience. And again, if you want to see the rest of Roy's showreel, I have just dropped the link in the chat. Roy, could you tell us the first film you saw on the big screen that you were taken to see as a kid that you can remember?
The Greatest Show on Earth. Cecil B. DeMille's Greatest Show on Earth.
That's a pretty good and telling choice right there. What was the last movie you saw on the big screen?
Oh my, that's a good. The Chris Nolan film, the new Chris Nolan film,
Oppenheimer.
Yes.
Funnily enough, that's the most common answer that I've had all year so far. Is that?
Oh, I saw it 3 times, twice in the booth. In the IMAX booth, and 1 time in the audience.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. Have you got a movie that you personally like to watch at least once a year in your own collection at home?
I have many. Last year at Marienbad is one of my favorites, and then the movie The Uninvited, which is a ghost story with Ray Milland.
Yeah.
I love that film. I love the photography. It's just extraordinary.
That film scared the crap out of me as a kid. Since the year 2000, have you got a television series, not one of the ones that you worked on, that you personally watched and were hooked and you thought, yeah, this is good, this is groundbreaking, I like this?
I don't watch television series. I hate television series.
Oh, damn, really?
I agree.
I don't watch them.
You didn't watch The Sopranos or Breaking Bad or
no.
any of those? No.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well, I'll confine my questions to movies, apart from maybe some of the TV shows that you worked on. Do you have a film in your collection that you might call a guilty pleasure? Not one that's necessarily been critically acclaimed, but one that you really like to watch. It might be Independence Day or Jurassic Park or something a bit more commercial or
I'm sorry, it's none of those. It's I love Abbott and Costello's Hold That Ghost.
That works. We can go with that. Fantastic. Which director would you most like to work with that you haven't worked with yet?
Peter Weir.
What a great choice. He did Dead Poet Society, right?
No, he did Picnic at Hanging Rock. He did The Witness. I don't believe he did Dead Poets Society, but I'm not quite sure. But I saw that as well. But he's one of my favorite of his films was not done for the theater. Was done for ABC Australia, which is called The Plumber.
Right. Yeah.
And I love that because you're never quite sure who the villain is.
He did do Dead Poet Society.
I did see that.
I just had to double check just in case I got it wrong. But the first film I saw of his was Picnic at Hanging Rock. He is an incredible director, and I think he also shot that movie, The Cars That Ate Paris.
Yes.
Yeah, which is quite a bizarre one. Do you have a favorite Peter Weir movie, Wayne?
I'd probably go with Witness as well. Yeah, it's
Harrison Ford.
Yeah, I saw that when I was very young, and it always struck me. And it holds up to these days. It's one I kind of go back to often. And Picnic at Hanging Rock is an absolutely haunting, beautiful film. Yeah. But there's something about Witness, and what I love about Peter Weir is he's able to bring great, incredible artistry to what are otherwise mainstream studio films, and that can often be a rarity.
Well, Witness is the only film where Danny Glover's played a villain, as far as I know. So let's get.
What I love about him is that he doesn't give you all the information. He's very, very concise with what he tells you and what he excludes, and that makes him a powerful grammatical filmmaker, a visual grammatical filmmaker.
Yeah, I have to admit, for years after I watched it as a kid, I thought that Picnic at Hanging Rock was an entirely true story. I know there's some nuggets of truth in the story, but it's largely fictional. And he had me doing all kinds of quests for information as a result of seeing that film. So let's go back to the beginning of your career. When did you first sort of get interested? I suppose I should ask, when did you first pick up a camera? What was the gateway drug into the crazy film industry for you?
Probably 1955, but I actually became embraced in Hollywood in 1960 because I started going to. It was 1957 was the first movie set I was ever on.
Right.
And that was A Face in the Crowd, and that was how I met my mentor, and so I began to follow him as much as I could. And I grew up in the Midwest, so it was hard to follow anybody in the Midwest because there weren't that many movies made there. But I did get to watch A Horse Soldier being made with John Ford. I got to watch some of How the West Was Won being filmed.
Wow.
There were quite a few pieces I got to see when they would come to the Midwest, and always with the encouragement that if I ever got to Hollywood, I should look them up. And regrettably for them, I took them up on that. And you always when I came to Hollywood, I came to Hollywood and I didn't leave.
So you said on the movie A Face in the Crowd, which was directed by Eli Kazan, if I remember.
Yes.
You met your mentor. Was that another cinematographer, or was that Kazan?
Yes. It was my mentor, Harry Stradling, and I was a little boy. I was 10 years old, so it was. I think he was shocked and charmed that I was not wanting to meet a movie star or meet a director. I was wanting to meet another cinematographer,
Right.
and so I think that was in that era. Now today, everybody wants to meet cinematographers, but in that era, they were the wizard behind the curtain, and so I think he thought it was cute, and I asked a lot of dumb questions, but he was patient with me, and he was an extraordinary cinematographer. He did a picture of Dorian Gray and Streetcar Named Desire, and I think he was astonished that I saw that when I did, and he was just he was a great teacher. He didn't treat you like you were stupid, and that was wonderful for me.
I mean, he had 144 credits as a cinematographer. He shot a lot of big musicals like Hello, Dolly, Funny Girl,
I worked with him on Hello Dolly. I was on the set of Funny Girl. I was on the set of My Fair Lady.
Right. I mean, so I guess so. You had these people come out west shooting those films. What age were you when you took the leap and you went to Hollywood?
Well, I was born in 47, so 1960 would be whatever. I'm not very good at math.
13.
Yeah, I didn't come to stay. I only came to stay in 1968 when I was drafted as a soldier in the Air Force, and I had to go to Vietnam. But I spent a lot of time in Hollywood, and also spent a lot of time with Ansel Adams, being his assistant, and so it was a great learning experience for me. I didn't like the war, I didn't like the military, but my commander was an ex-animator at Disney, and when he got brought back into the military as a colonel, he saw that I really loved what I did, and he said, "Look, I'm not going to put you in all the bullshit G jobs. I'm going to let you go to Hollywood as often as you can, and I'm going to let you go to a friend of mine's got arthritis, and if you can go up and help him, I'm sure he'll be a great teacher for you, and it'll be helpful for him." So he would send me on what they called OJT, which was on-the-job training, which is silly because, if anybody looked at it, I was just in fairyland. I was going to all these wonderful places and hanging out with my heroes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about some of the sets that you were on, and you would have been within a few feet of people like Audrey Hepburn.
Well, I met Audrey Hepburn on My Fair Lady, and I met John Wayne on True Grit, and I met a lot of movie stars, because what would happen is that the studios, every soundstage had a different film and a different cinematographer. So if it was getting boring on one set, Harry would say, "Why don't you go over here to James Wong Howe's set?" And so I would meet James Wong Howe, and I think he was doing Ombre or something like that. And so I would meet a lot of people. I didn't really care about the movie stars. I didn't even really care about the directors. All I really cared about were the cinematographers. And, it was, they always know somebody that's a guest that's on the set. And so, if they had any curiosity at all, they'd come over and talk to me and be a part of it. I still am gung-ho, but I was so gung-ho about the process and about them, and I knew who they were. I knew their credits, and so that made them, everybody's ego driven, so that made them even more want to help me. And so I was very lucky. I met a lot of really incredible people. I met Alfred Hitchcock. I met John Ford. I was on the set of the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So I met Jimmy Stewart and Disney, Mary Poppins, and Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and Harry's operator had been his operator, became a director of photography at Disney, and he did all the Disney movies. So I would go over there and meet him. So, it was frustrating for me in a lot of ways because I wanted to do their job.
Yeah.
And they were doing it. And it took me, after I got out of the military, it took me 13 years to get into the Union. So It was a long, difficult road. And in the midst of that, I was doing films like Hollywood Meat Cleaver Massacre with, I can never remember his name.
Ed Wood.
Yeah, Ed Wood, yes.
Right.
It was the director. We shot that in 4 days.
You've liked everyone pretty much.
I did a bunch of ninja films.
Yeah.
With Sho Kosugi and Jackie Chan, and then I did horror films. I did some horror films that were never released, and some horror films that were like Witchboard and
Return to Horror High and
Return to Horror High, which is the thing that got me Nightmare on Elm Street, was Return to Horror High.
I mean, I'll I'll come on to those in a minute, but I want to touch on some of the can of worms that you've just opened, if I may. So, I mean, before you, what, just going back a bit, what was it that drew you to cinematographers in particular? Because that is quite an unusual thing, especially back then.
I was obsessed as a little boy with the light coming out of the projection booth. I couldn't understand that shaft of light that would dance back and forth out of the projection booth and would display upon the screen, and there would be these huge close-ups. And it drove my mother and dad nuts, and the people sitting behind us, because I'd be turned around looking at that. And they'd keep saying, turn around, watch the movie. And I'd turn around for a bit and be enchanted by the movie. But what really enchanted me was that light coming out of the booth. And finally, one day, my father talked to the manager, and I was allowed to go up in the projection booth, and there were these giant black monsters belching smoke and making a lot of noise. And they were scary. Again, I'm a little boy. And so the projectionist put me on a stool next to the one projector that was running. And he said, now that is the movie. And he pointed at the projection gate, and the movie was upside down, and it was a series of still pictures. And I, for a moment, was heartbroken. I thought, how could this movie start with just being still pictures? It doesn't make any sense. And then it became, well, this is magic. This is like magic. And he said, if you ever wanted to be in the movie business, you need to be a director of photography, because they're the ones that make the movies. You got to understand, this is a projectionist in a little tiny town, 20,000 people. And he's telling my dad, he said, get him a notebook and write down the names of all the cinematographers of the movies you see, and the names of the movies. And at one point you'll say, I like this cinematographer a lot. And that's what I did. And one day I was at the library, which was, again, a very small library. And I don't know what I was looking at, but I heard someone come in, a gentleman come in a suit. He said, do you have a phone directory for Los Angeles? And for some magical moment, I thought, Los Angeles. All those names have phone numbers. I could look up those names of people I like, and I could call them. And you have to understand, this is the 1950s, and calling coast to coast was a very expensive thing to do. I didn't know that.
Right.
So I got the phone book, and which was, lots of phone books. And I started looking up names. Of course, guys with names like Smith were hard to find, but Harry Stradling was not a hard name to find. And so I got his number, and he answered, and he said he was shocked. He said, what movie did you see? And I don't even remember what the movie was. And he said, well, you want to be a cinematographer. It's a hard job, and it's going to take you a long time to become one. But if I can ever help you, you can call me anytime and ask me any question. And when you come to Hollywood, I will show you around. And, I look back on that now, and a lot of people say those things and they don't mean it.
No, sure.
But Harry meant it. And I would call him, as often as I could, until my father got the phone bill and he realized what was happening. And he said, look, you're going to have to behave. You're going to have to do well in school, and you're going to have to do what we ask you to do here. And you can call him once a month. And so that's what I did. And I tried to make a list of questions, but I was stupid. I didn't know anything. I didn't know 24 frames per second. I didn't know, where lights go or anything. But, I was just enchanted, and I was talking to my hero, and he was being a great hero. Mm. And so that was the beginning of it. And I never gave up. I just I never gave up following my dream.
So it sounds to me like you had a pretty good knack for pestering the right people for advice quite early on, and I guess a bit of luck, a bit of good luck in terms of the ones who were willing to sort of turn around and, offer you a hand and show you around and perhaps show you the ropes a little bit early on, which I'm sure must have been invaluable, especially back then.
Well, they didn't have the egos that the young cinematographers have. They were sort of enchanted by this little boy who loved what they did, because they never got credit for anything. In those days, the director got credit for everything. And I think that sort of was charming for them. And the word got around. So Harry started talking to his friends. And so when I got to Hollywood, I had the person that opened the door for me at the ASC the very first time, the American Society of Cinematographers, very first time I walked through the door was James Wong Howe.
Right.
And he was supposed to be a tough guy, but he said, "Mr. Wagner, you're welcome here." And he introduced me around to all the cinematographers who in those days were masters. They were Leon Shamroy, Arthur Miller, Hal Moore, extraordinary cinematographers. And I met as many as possible. And they would let me come into the clubhouse anytime I wanted. And I would sit there for hours on end talking to them. And they would teach me about light meters. They would teach me about how, set discipline. They loved to tell war stories. And, that was wonderful. I'm the new war story guy now, but in those days they had great war stories. And it was fascinating because I got to hear about Arthur Miller working on How Green Was My Valley, or Mark of Zorro, or Leon Shamroy working on Cleopatra, or not Cleopatra, but The King and I, or Forever Amber, and Jimmy Wong Howe working on Ombre. And you didn't have to say much. They would do most of the talking, and it was basically war stories. And you could learn so much from those war stories because it was how they presented themselves. How, you got to learn what their personality was like, and how they, were they tough guys or were they gentle people, or whatever they were. And most of them presented themselves as tough guys because in managing 150 member crew, you had to act like you were the commander. And once you got them one-on-one, you got to see the real person.
I mean, before we sort of dive into the nuggets of your career, and there's quite a lot to talk about, one of the things I really want to ask you is, I had no idea your career started so early in terms of the big characters that we know as pillars of Hollywood history, really. We're talking Hitchcock, Ed Wood, James Wong Howe, big DOP. And I just got a photograph of him, and I have to say, he reminds me of Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid. So if you had a pretty good sensei, if that was the case. What would you say is, because you're still working in the industry, what would you say is one of the main differences you've noticed about the approach shooting a feature film, particularly in the relationship with the DOP and the director back then to how it is now?
It really, it's not different if you have the right director and the right cinematographer. I mean, if you have a director who thinks that he's created the entire movie, there's no place for you. But in the old days, there was a great sense of respect for each other. It was like you worked 6-day weeks. We worked long hours. So you had to find a way of getting along with each other. And you protected each other. The crews, you worked with the same crew members for 50 years. That's very different today. And they knew you very well. They knew you on your good days and on your bad days. And they knew when you were going to a dark place with the director, and so they would step in, and the camera operator would step in, or whomever would step in and help you. And it also, you answer to one singular person. At MGM, it was Eddie Mannix, who was just under Louis B. Mayer. At Warner Brothers, you answered to Hal Wallace or to Jack Warner, or at Fox it was Daryl Zanuck. You only had one person you had to answer to, and I remember Arthur Miller telling me the story that a brand new director came to work at 20th Century Fox, and the director was told who's by Daryl Zanuck. He had a meeting with Zanuck. He said, "Who is your cinematographer?" And the director said, "Arthur Miller." And so Zanuck had Arthur Miller brought into his office, and he told the director, "If you do everything that Arthur Miller tells you to do, you'll make a successful picture. And if you make a successful picture, then you'll have another job here. But if you don't do what Arthur tells you to do, you won't succeed and you'll never be back." There's no way that would be said today, because everybody there's vanity everywhere, and every director thinks that they are the only director that's ever made a movie, and they're not really interested in collaboration. I have been very, very lucky. I've worked with a lot of really collaborative directors, people that respect me and respect my position and allow me a voice. And, that collaboration is remarkable, because when you're collaborating, you don't even remember whose idea something was. You only remember you're making a great movie, and you're all partnered in it. And so that's somewhat different, but, movie business is the movie business. It's always been tough. It's always been dirty. It's always been ruthless. And so it's not that different today than it was then. The biggest difference, I would say, is lack of wisdom. The young people come in and they don't have the mentors I had who kicked the shit out of me and beat me up and told me when I was wrong and put me through basic training. And the gift I had from that was I knew how to behave amongst other people. And the new cinematographers they don't last very long, because they don't have that kind of mentorship. And that's why I try to be mentor. I do a great deal to try to mentor other cinematographers, because I don't want anybody to ever go through that part, because it's that little hidden secret that nobody tells each other. And that is that it's not about the art, it's about the craft and the relationships. Yeah. And so my mentor told me, if you can work fast and you can save money and if everything looks incredible, you'll work forever. But if you work slow and it costs them a lot of money, you're not going to work as much. Yeah. And it's the truth. And one other thing he said to me, which has been sort of a mantra of my life, is that even though in reality you get a turn, in truth, as a cinematographer, any time you take on the set is stolen from the director and the actors. Yeah. So you have to find a way to do your work in as efficient a way as possible. And he said, nobody hires you for the easy stuff. They hire you for the hard stuff. So you better learn how to do the hard stuff very efficiently. And I have that's been my mantra, and because of that, I'm still here and I'm still making movies. So it's been. I don't think many people work that way. I think that everybody thinks they get a turn. Makeup comes in and they do their part. They say, "Well, I have to take them away for an hour," or cinematographers says, "Well, that's going to take me an hour and a half to light." Well, that's all stolen. That's time that's not on the screen. It's all stolen from the movie. And so, I pride myself in trying to accomplish all three well.
Yeah, I'm still kind of, my head is swimming with so many questions that I wasn't prepared for. But let's dive into your career. So tell us about, because the first DOP credit that you've got on IMDb is for a low budget horror film called Evil Force, which I'm guessing was not sort of, I guess it was something that you fell into by accident. But
I don't even remember that movie. Who was the director?
That's another title for Hollywood Massacre.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was I owned the camera and I owned the lens, and so I was an easy mark. They needed somebody cheap and fast,
Yeah.
and I was the guy. And the original director got fired virtually the first day, and Ed Wood, who was supposed to be the still photographer on the set, took over.
Right.
And
Okay.
I think it was the last thing he did.
So then you had a sort of a string of, because the directors were Evan Lee and Edward Jr. on that one. You had a string of, I guess I call them low budget horror films or martial arts movie. You got 9 Deaths of the Ninja, which I rented when that came out. Pray for Death, which I rented. Witchboard, which I rented. I can't remember if I saw Return to Horror High. I had a poster for Witchboard on my bedroom wall for quite a while because the big one came in one of those film video magazine things I got. So was that a series of jobs that one led to the other? Because you'd done a horror film or you'd done a martial arts film, so you met somebody who recommended you for the next one, and so on.
Everything begets everything else. I mean, it's really Witchboard came about because a crew that I had mentored was on this movie, and they said, "Roy, are you doing anything?" I said, "No," and they said, "Would you come and help this new cinematographer? He's having a lot of trouble." It was on the first day. You could be the operator. I went, "Oh yeah, I love operating." So I went in, and by the end of the first day, he was gone, and I was the director of photography. He just couldn't work. He couldn't wrap his head around what the director wanted. He and the director were friends, and so I had to start over. I had to reshoot everything he'd shot, and I think there's 1 or 2 shots in the movie that's still his. And I worked with a director who was his first movie, and very nice guy. He knew what he wanted. He was frightened because he'd already had one bad experience, and we've been friends ever since. He's a wonderful person, and he wanted me to do his next movie after that, and I couldn't do it. And but I did Witchboard with him. It was incredibly fun. We had a great crew, wonderful crew that followed me on through to Nightmare on Elm Street. But
this is director Kevin Tinney.
Yes.
You got to work with Tawny Kitten. I got to ask what she was like.
Oh, Tawny Katane?
Yeah, Katane, yeah.
Tawny was crazier than hell.
I had a massive crush on her because of her White Snake video that she did in the 80s.
Well, she was having an affair with O.J. Simpson when we were making that movie.
Right. And
we used to go and shake her trailer at lunchtime when she was with O.J. And she was very nice. She was great, but crazy. And but it was all fun. It was a lot of fun doing that movie. The cast was great. Locations. That house is still just off of Wilshire Boulevard. It's definitely haunted. We went up to Big Bear. We were like a bunch of high school kids, crazy high school kids. It was fun.
I can imagine. Now, I think you said earlier, doing Horror High was the film that got you Nightmare on Elm Street 3. This is quite a big IP. We're still in the sort of early era of sequels, but between 1982 and 1989, there was a lot of sequels made. This came out in the UK in 88. It was still playing in the States when I went over there for the first time. So I saw this in the cinema in America. Do you want to, was there, because this is, for me, and I know for Wayne, it's quite an important film in his cinema culture growing up. What I remember about this film is it was particularly inventive, because Elm Street 2 was a real letdown. and everybody was like, you know, is the third one going to be any good? This one was really inventive. It was really interesting. It had a much more captivating script. The second one was a bit all over the place. It reeked of producer meddling. I really liked Elm Street 3. What was the brief for you coming in? Was there a brief? Was there a sit down, or was it more off the fly of your seat of your pants, or what? And
Rachel Talalay was the assistant director in Return to Horror High,
right,
and she was having a lot of trouble on that show, and I befriended her, and I helped her get through it. It was not a difficult show at all. It was just I really don't know what it was, but she was having difficulties with it, and she liked working with me so much. She said, I'm getting ready to do this movie, and I want you to go and interview with the director. And so she got me an interview with the director, a guy named Chuck Russell. Yeah. I went in and met with him, and I walked out of the office. I thought I had the job. I was sure I had the job. It was one of those times when you walk away knowing, that's it. I'm doing the movie. And the next thing I hear from other people is someone else is doing this movie. I can't believe it. So I called up Rachel, and she said, I don't understand it. He chose somebody else, but we'll work together someday. So I'm at a restaurant with a friend of mine. This is about a month later, maybe 2 months later. Right. And this is the era before cell phones. This is when we had beepers. We had pagers.
Yeah. Like doctors back in the day.
Yes. And so I had my pager, and I'm getting this page with this number with 911. So I don't know this number, and it's 911. So I go out to another thing from the past, a phone booth, and I go out to the phone booth and I call, and it's Rachel, and she says, "Roy, I've got big problems. We're in day 2 of the show. I think it was day 2 of the show, and it's impossible to say, but we're way behind. We haven't even gotten our first day's work yet. Right. And I need for you to come and take over the show." And right. I wanted to say F you, because you didn't let me, you didn't hire me for the first.
Yeah.
But she said, "Come and meet with the director tonight, and I want you to take the show over." Well, fortunately for me, I wasn't arrogant and egotistical, and I didn't hang up on her. Yeah. And I went to the set. There was at UCLA. They were shooting a scene of the clock tower, which is outside the window of the hospital for the kids, where Freddie has got his tentacles, and he's puppeteering one of the kids.
Oh yeah.
It's a simple shot. It was an absolutely simple shot, but they'd been lighting it for over 2 hours, and they still hadn't gotten it. And so I went into the trailer, and I met with Chuck again. And Chuck was always he was very full of himself. And I think it was a huge problem for him to admit that he was wrong. But he said, I'd like for you to take this over. It's just not going well. But, if you can't make it work for them, I'm going to have to replace you. And I said, okay. And so they'd already, their first day they'd shot was the sequence outside of Elm Street house, which was of her waking up from her bed and realizing she's not in her bedroom anymore, and she's somehow been transported to the front of the Elm Street house. And the complexity of it was that the camera has to go into slow motion, and it has to somehow go across the street and to the little girl with a bicycle outside the house.
Yeah, I remember the shot actually.
And is it where she says, "This is where he takes us"? I think that's what happens. It's a very complicated shot, and the complications were technical in that we didn't have a Steadicam. The Steadicams weren't, if they existed, we didn't have one. And besides that, it had to feel like you were floating on air to the house. And I knew as good as the dolly tracks were, that if I did a high-speed move, a ramp very quickly up to the house, you'd get all kinds of bouncing, and when you'd stop, you'd get this. It would sag. So I thought, and the other problem was that the previous cinematographer had tried to use HMIs, and HMIs, which are a light, and they flicker when you change speeds. So even though he changes speed, going from 24 frames to high speed, 72 frames, you have a moment where it flickers. Well, that was not acceptable for the studio or the director. So I said, okay, well, here I am an old, even though I was a young man, I knew I'd learned by using old technology. So I said, okay, we have to use arc lights because they don't flicker, carbon arcs, and we have to change the speed from 24 frames to 72 frames as she rises up, and then when we pass her, we have to get the camera down to, I think it was 4 frames per second, and dolly very, very, very slowly, and have all the actors move very, very slowly, so that I'm taking basically 1 picture a second, and you're not going to see any of the bouncing because the camera's literally moving, and I'm taking a still picture, moving, taking a still picture, so you don't see any of the bouncing whatsoever. And so by the time we get to the girl, we go back to 24 frames so she can say her line of dialogue. And it was very complicated, but I knew how to do it. So we did it. And they said, well, hopefully tomorrow the dailies will be great and you'll be fine. And the dailies were great, and I was fine. And I finished the picture. And it was tough to do because I completely replaced the crew that was there. I brought my crew in, and our first day was really the car graveyard, the big giant junkyard. No cable had been run. I had not seen the location, and the director wanted this big giant shot that showed the whole place. And we're shooting film. It's slow film. It's not the fast film that was available later. It's slow film, so I had to use a lot of light. And so I had the crew come out early and lay cable, and we got the first shot in like a half an hour, which blew the director away. And that was a shot of John Saxon driving up to the sign graveyard. Rack focused at seeing him in his rearview mirror. Gosh, I can't believe I remember all this. And then the camera arms up to see the whole sign graveyard, and that was a huge shot. And we did it in a half an hour, and then so I was golden by that point. They couldn't get rid of me, and the director ended up taking all the time he wanted because now it was his time. I was not taking his time anymore.
Right.
And so if there was somebody who was being slow, they had to go and talk to the director, who didn't care. He just said, fire me. If you don't like what I'm doing, fire me. Of course, they couldn't do that. And so he was, we worked long hours. We worked 18 to 21-hour days. And I was not only the director of photography, I was the camera operator. So
it was all worth it in the end, because I'm sure Wayne will know this. I think it was a pretty successful picture financially, the third movie.
It was very big, and it has remained something. I think it's the fan favorite these days as well. So it's not only a financial success, but it's considered a great horror movie.
Yeah.
Well, and it made New Line Cinema, because New Line Cinema was almost out of business when Nightmare 2 didn't do well. And this was made. I don't think this was a very expensive film. All the money went into effects. It didn't, and everything was physical. We didn't do, but I think one or two blue screen effects. One of which was the bodies hanging in the house, all the bodies hanging. Her falling through the chair, I did in camera, which was great fun. I love doing that. And that was very, very simple. Other than that, I can't remember. Oh, the other one is his bed over the fire pit, which we built that set on its side, and so that we could get a camera in close to him, and we put a blue screen behind his bed for the fire pit. And I think those are the few complicated optical. That this is all mechanical. But here's the funny thing: the pig scene, that was they tried to build a mechanical pig. They couldn't do it, so they went to a slaughterhouse and bought a real pig and gutted it, and the prop master had to put his hands into the pig to make that thing leap, and it stuck so bad. It was
yeah, especially if you've got it under the lights and everything starts to kind of ferment.
Mm-hmm.
That image right there you just came across, Lance, with Dokken reminds me as well of the success of this film. I think it was the right time. Yeah, because this was the MTV era, and I think
I shot that video too.
Yeah, because there was a song, wasn't there, that accompanied this?
Dream
with
Warriors.
That kind of riff track of the main that theme,
it was called Dream Warriors, Dokken, and it came out in the MTV era. So it kind of cut on. It was Freddie Mania after this movie. So it was really hit pop culture with this film.
Well, let's there's lots of other things to talk about, so let me move on because I don't want to run out of time. Talking of time, one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's probably one of my favorite Johnny Depp movies because he scales his performance is so contained. It's not his usual. He's really acting in this movie. I mean, not to say he's not acting when he does Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's a much more measured performance, shall we say, is Nick of Time. And I really love this movie. It's by one of my favorite directors, who's John Badham, who of course did War Games, and is kind of known as a guy who directs really good car chases. And I was surprised that this film didn't do bigger business because it was trailered in the cinema in the UK, and I was waiting for it to come out. And then the next thing I knew, no cinema release, straight to video. I was really disappointed. But as soon as it came out on video, I was there day one, got it out. And it was like an episode of 24, the Kiefer Sutherland thing. Almost the whole gimmick with the film is it's almost in real time. And I guess you'll fill in the blanks for us here, but this must have been one of those rare occasions, I feel, for continuity and things, where this must have been shot in order.
It was shot in order.
Yeah.
We shot the whole film in order, and it was, and Johnny was fantastic. We became really good friends, and he was great to work with. John Badham, I just saw last week. We did a commentary for a new release of Drop Zone, and was telling the Vinegar Syndrome, the company. I was saying you really need to do a new Nick of Time because I love Nick of Time. It was great fun. It's a great script. John, I did 3 movies with John and a bunch of television, and I love John. He's just so much fun to work with. He's very demanding, very challenging. He doesn't suffer fools.
I can imagine.
But we've been friends for a very long time, and I did The Hard Way with him. I did the second unit on The Hard Way.
That film is so underrated. That film is amazing. I saw that at the cinema in the UK, but it was only released in London. It didn't get a wide release.
Well, I did all the stuff with Michael J. Fox, all the Indiana Jones stuff in the jungle. Yeah. And he wanted to replace that cameraman, but he didn't. And and I stayed on the East Coast. He told me to stay on the East Coast while he made the decision. He did make the decision, which I never liked seeing people replaced. But then I got his next movie, which was another steak. I didn't get his next movie. I was doing something else. But I can't remember what his next movie was. But
he did The Hard Way. Then he did Point of No Return.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. Mm-hmm.
And then another Stakeout, which I actually quite enjoyed. I love both the Stakeout movies.
Another Stakeout was not the movie that was scripted. It became more of a comedy, and it was all on the fly because of the cast. I mean, what's her name? I can't think of her name. Rosie O'Donnell was very funny, and so she kept coming up with ideas. They were humorous. All that stuff at the dining table, with the eggs and all that stuff, that was never scripted. The original script was much more serious, like Stakeout, which I love Stakeout. And I think that the comedy sort of diminished Another Stakeout, although I think it's a good movie. I think it would have been a better movie if it were serious, with Richard being the humorous person he was in Stakeout. But back to The Nick of Time. We did that all in sequence. Incredibly difficult movie to do, even though it looks like a documentary, because we were in a location which had glass ceilings, so the light was changing every instant, and I couldn't have that because it was only supposed to take place in 90 minutes. So we had to have grips up on the glass ceiling, walking all the time, blocking out the light, the sunlight. Everything had to be lit, and because John wanted to do everything sequentially, I had to have everything lit at the same time, so he could go anywhere.
Right.
So it was wonderful because the camera never stopped. It was we would go from one setup to the next, and there was no waiting for the lighting to be done. It was already done, and it was like shooting a documentary. And John and I, when we talked about the movie, we said we would like for it to be like medium cool, because that was about the Democratic Convention in Chicago, and it was like a documentary, and it was never like a documentary, but it was his version of a documentary. And we never were on a dolly. We either were on a Steadicam or handheld.
Yeah.
And that he loved that, because that meant he could go wherever he wanted to go, and he could go wherever he wanted to go, as could the actors, because there were no limitations, because there were no lights in their way.
Right.
And so we had over 150 lights on that set, but you couldn't see any of them.
I mean, that's a pretty incredible way of having certain freedom on the set there. And was the technology with Steadicams, were cameras? This is 95, so I imagine cameras were a bit lighter and a bit more manageable than when you were shooting Dream Warriors, which would have been 10 years previous. Nearly. Yes,
the cameras were much smaller. We were using Panaflexes, and we were on Technocranes and Steadicam. And of course, the Steadicam was for John. It was a dream, because he could shoot wherever he wanted to shoot, and I wasn't going to stop him. And it wasn't me saying, "Oh, John, give me half an hour." Something like that, so I can go fix this. There was none of that. He was always able to shoot. And the reason the film was not successful was because Sherry Lansing loved the movie, and she gave him a movie as a favor for him doing Drop Zone. She had Drop Zone on the books. It was a movie they needed to get made, or it was going to cost them a lot of money. And so he went out and made Drop Zone reluctantly, and they gave him Nick of Time. Well, What nobody knows is that the guy that was in charge of distribution hated John Badham and hated Sherry. And so he put another movie he put the movie in competition at the worst time of the year, so that it would be impossible for it to succeed. Didn't do much advertising, and so this film, which is like a no-brainer for entertainment value, never got the chance that it got. And it's funny because now people see it and they go, "Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite movies."
Yeah.
And it's because the distributor, the Paramount distributor, hated John Badham and hated Sherry Lansing, and wanted to bury the film, and he did. He buried the film.
Unfortunately, this industry attracts some proper egotistical, toxic people, and that's such a shame, because you think about the number of people that worked on this movie. We've got Gloria Reuben up on the image there. She's a massively underrated actress in my view, and I was in regular touch with her at one point. It was some project we were going to do. I can't remember now, but yeah, this was one of the first things I saw her in outside of ER. I was like, this movie was. I was on the edge of my seat, and I really wished I'd seen it for the first time in the cinema. And they, that guy, whoever that guy was, robbed us of that experience. I'm quite annoyed about that.
Yeah.
But it is a great film. If people haven't watched it, you should see it. I don't know if it's available on Blu-ray yet, but it's definitely deserving of a re-release. Maybe
it's on Blu-ray, and I think I've convinced Vinegar Syndrome, which is a DVD company. I think that they're going to talk to Paramount about re-releasing this.
Yeah.
And John and I will go in and do a commentary. I told him, I said, look, we did a great commentary on Drop Zone, but I said, we really have a lot to talk about regarding Another Stakeout and Nick of Time.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I think Nick of Time is a far superior film to Drop Zone.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. Well, basically, Drop Zone is Passenger 53.
Yeah.
And, it was done originally. Andy Garcia was supposed to have the part that Wesley Snipes had. I think it would have been a better movie then. It was just it was a popcorn movie.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's a shame that got quite a big release and this didn't. And I feel if the shoe was on the other foot, this film would have done big business. So let's jump onto some other things. I mean, you've worked on a lot of television, including some pretty big TV IPs. But I'm going to guess that your preference is always for feature films.
It is, although my favorite television show is Cracker that I did. I loved Cracker. There was a Cracker in England.
Yeah, the one with Robbie Coltrane.
Robbie Coltrane, yes. Yeah. And they wanted to do the studio and from England wanted to do an American version, and so we did it. And we had the same producers, same directors, same scripts, exactly the same scripts. But a different person playing Robert Pastorelli playing Coltrane's part.
Yeah.
The great gift is our last episode, we had Robbie come over and play the villain in the last episode.
Oh, way.
Robbie's fantastic. I love him. Yeah. And the reason that worked, that show worked in England, is Robbie is a comedian, and he never played the dark part of that character. It was his humor infused into that dark character that made that character work. Whereas Robert Pastorelli is not a comedian. He's just a very dark character. And I don't think his portrayal worked as well. But if someone asked me what my favorite television show was, it would be that. Although I've done CSI and I've done House and I've done projects like that. And again, House, I think, works very well because that actor, Hugh Laurie, is a comedian playing a dark part. If it had been an American actor that was playing the character, it would have never worked. But the fact that Hugh Laurie, in his core, is a comedian, and so there's that surly, sort of sardonic quality that made that character work.
I mean, you've also worked on, some pretty big, what I would call American institution shows, like Party of Five, which ran from 94 to 2000. you know, 4 or 5 of the actors that were in that are massive names now, like Neve Campbell, Matthew Fox, Scott Grimes, probably the biggest of the lot, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Scott Wolf.
And they were all just kids. They were all just, some of them weren't even, they had to go to school while they were on the set because they were not old enough yet. And it was a good show. I mean, it was basically the same show every week, but how they dealt with the conflict of not having any parents and all that. The thing I think I brought to it is I made it a dark show. I made it not a big Aaron Spelling show, which was bright, and I made it broody. And I remember Liz Smith, who is a critic in the United States, said this could be a great show and it would run forever if it wasn't for Roy Wagner's dark photography.
Really?
And I wrote her a letter and said, Liz, you know, the show's gone pretty well. I've been doing it for 2 years. I left after the second season. But I said, it's been doing pretty well. Maybe you might want to go see a doctor and see if your eyes are okay. And I never got a response back. But I thought that the characters just couldn't be these dark characters in a bright, happy Aaron Spelling space. They had to be in a dark space. And so that's how I portrayed it, which made it more palatable for me because I could do interesting things. But it was after the second season, I felt I'd done everything I knew how to do in that set. We were always on that set. And so I needed to move on. So I moved on from there. I did Cop Rock, I think, after that, and which was dreadfully ridiculous, but great fun.
Yeah, Daniel J. Pico, and I haven't seen you in my chat before, Daniel, so welcome to the channel. He got to see Nick of Time at the theaters, and he loved it. So
that's great.
There's a movie theater in Leicester Square, which, as you know, I'm sure, is the heart of where we show films in.
Sure, I've been there.
Yeah, called the Prince Charles, and it shows older movies. Mm-hmm. You should definitely, you and John should get onto them and ask them to do a screening of Nick of Time.
Why don't you and Wayne approach John? Wayne knows how to approach John. Why don't you approach John and have them invite John and I over, and we'll do a Nick of Time screening.
I know the manager at a cinema, so I'll give him a call about that tomorrow. And
please do.
Yeah.
And John could show War Games or Blue Thunder as well. You know, make it a whole John Badham day. And he loves England. I mean, he's done a number of films in England. He loves it there, as do I. And I know he would jump at that chance.
Yeah, he's directed about 4 of my favorite movies of all time. So, feel free to pass that on.
I will.
And I really do need to grab the Blu-ray of Nick of Time. So, in terms of, I guess, what would you say, what's the best collaboration you've ever had with a director, and why was it so good?
Oh, I've had many. John was one of them. I loved working with Darren Sarafian, although we nearly got in a fist fight the first time we ever worked together.
Please tell us more about that.
Well, he was pretty cocky, and I was just not having any of it. It was Fantasy Island, which with Malcolm McDowell, and I was tired that day or whatever, and I got back at him, and we nearly got in a fist fight. And then I thought, okay, all right, this is silly, this is dumb to do, and we became good friends. And he is a very challenging, out of the box filmmaker, which is my favorite kind of filmmakers. Mm-hmm. If you look up Darren's credits, he's done a lot of good things. I worked with him on House. I loved working with him on House.
He did a great film back in the mid-90s for Miramax before they became huge after Pulp Fiction, called Road Flower or The Road Killers of Christopher Lambert.
Yeah, I remember that film.
His father did one of my favorite films, which I'm blanking on the name of now.
Vanishing Point.
Vanishing Point, yes. I love Vanishing Point, and his father did that. And
The Road Killer is kind of a tribute to that.
well, Darren is a very, very talented filmmaker, and he's done too much television, which is frustrating because I wish he would do more features because he is really a talented filmmaker. But you can always tell something that Darren. My favorite House episode is the one that I did with Darren. Michael Denner, another television director I've worked with. I love working with. Who's just another outside the box person. I did The Beast with him, with Patrick Swayze.
Yeah, that was Swayze's last production.
Yes.
And I think was Badham involved in that as well?
Yes. John and I worked on that together. And see, whom else would be?
That must have been quite a surreal experience because I know Swayze would have known he was on Borrowed Time.
Well, Patrick was still smoking in spite of the fact he had cancer.
Yeah.
He was curled up in a ball most of the time. And I remember one day John and I were shooting a scene, and Patrick came out of his trailer, and he looked like he was going to die right there that moment. And the shot was just a shot that started medium wide and moved in on Patrick. It wasn't a hard shot, but it was Patrick had to be that character at that moment. And we rolled the camera because Patrick said roll it. And as soon as the camera came on, Patrick was Patrick Swayze.
Right.
And as soon as the camera cut, he was in enormous pain. And I remember when my brother had worked with Patrick on North and South and said, "Oh, you're going to love him. He's a great guy." But we all knew he was dying of cancer. And I just thought to myself, I can't invest in this friendship. I just can't invest. I can't become friends with a guy that's not going to be here very long.
Right.
But there was no way not to be his friend. There was just no way. I mean, we ended up, he and his wife, Lisa, and I, we'd hang out every weekend. We'd go to the movies together. We'd go to dinner together. And it was just like your best friend. I mean, his nickname is Buddy, and he was like your buddy. And so I was around him more than I think I've ever been around any other actor. Right. And it wasn't those kinds of cutesy on-set friendships that come and go. I mean, Patrick was a friend. And I remember we were outside every time over any other actor I've ever worked with. When we were outside on location where the crowd could come, I've never seen crowds that large. They would swarm the set. And they were all screaming, "Patrick, we love you." And he was just very sweet with the crowds. And one night we were shooting this scene where he gets out of a car, goes into this restaurant. And we're on the streets, and Patrick gets out of the car, and we can't even continue the role because everybody's saying, "Patrick, we love you. We're praying for you." And he said, "Hey, I'm not dead yet." And it was the way he said it. It was so humorous that it made everybody laugh. And he was, if it was anybody that was going to ever beat cancer, it would have been Patrick.
Right.
And he did beat it for a long time. And I remember that last episode, I insisted that his wife direct that episode, Lisa, and she did a remarkably wonderful job. And when the executives from the studio and the network came on the set and said, "We're ready to pick it up for another season," and Patrick said no.
Yeah.
And so I knew that was it for him. So, he went back home. He spent a long time trying to get better, but just never got better. But he incidentally, in the midst of his cancer, did every one of his stunts. All the stunts that were done in that were Patrick.
Right.
So he was not going to go out like a coward. He was going to go out like a lion, and that's what he did. So that I worked with Michael Dinner on that, and I love Michael Dinner. I've done quite a few things with Michael, Fantasy Island being one of them, and Kidnapped being another, Elementary being another. I've done a lot of things with Michael, and I really like him a lot. He's very passionate. He's very methodical. He's very different than any of the other directors I've worked with, but I really have a great deal of respect for him. There's others. There's other directors I've worked with I feel the same way about. I don't feel that way about Chuck from Nightmare on Elm Street, Chuck Russell, because Chuck was, I don't know how to say this.
Well, I mean, you don't have to say anything you don't want to say. But
I want to say all of it, but I'm trying to be respectful as well. It's in the book, isn't it, Wayne?
It's all in the book.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear more detail about the conflict of struggles to get Nightmare on Elm Street 3 made with Roy and Chuck at the steering wheel, get hold of Wayne's book. Because he's done a breakdown of the whole Elm Street franchise, and then I think you've done a separate book about Roy's career as well. Is that right?
Well, that's it. We have. I did the book on Elm Street, and that's how I met Roy.
Yeah,
we did a book together, and we go deeper again into Nightmare on Elm Street 3. But yeah, that was a interesting production, let's just say. So it had some great stories that we delved into, and we spoke to a few people from that.
Yeah.
I spoke to Robert England. This is in the Elm Street book. I spoke to Robert England. I spoke to Roy. I spoke to Dennis McGuire, who's the assistant director. I spoke to Mick Strawn, who was the production designer, art director. And yeah, it was a very interesting thing. And that's how me and Roy connected. And it kind of, in a way, it kind of goes back to what Roy was saying about meeting your heroes, especially heroes. For me, this is kind of a full circle thing as well. Yeah. Listening to Roy tonight, you can see why I would have wanted to work with him, because Roy is walking, talking film history. I mean, this is a no-brainer for me. So, that was the film. It's one of my earliest film memories, if you can believe that. I saw it in 1988, going on 89, so I was very, very young when I saw it.
Yeah, I keep forgetting you're just a wee whippersnapper compared to me and Roy.
It made me much for me. And in the year that I saw Nightmare on Elm Street 3, I also, kind of started watching TV properly. So Beauty and the Beast was on.
Right.
That was another thing. I started noticing these things from an early age, like Roy with his mentors and his heroes, the cinematographers. And that became kind of my thing. I would follow all these guys and I'd start looking for other movies they did. So that's why I've ended up writing books on, Nick McLean and other directors, and now on Roy, because these are the people whose art, photography, their work beguiled me and hypnotized me earlier on. You know what I mean? So, listening to Roy talk about his heroes tonight reminds me very much about why I ended up doing a book with Roy and with Mick and with these people.
I just was noticing Rumor of Angels. Conrad Hall said it was the best photography I ever did. And your heartbreak is Nick of Time. My heartbreak is A Rumor of Angels, which we shot in Nova Scotia with Vanessa Redgrave. And I love that movie. And that was another very powerful influence on me, that director, Peter O'Fallon, who is a mad Irishman, not Irish in first generation Irish, but his family from Ireland, and Peter is just one of the most wonderful people I ever worked with. And again,
sure,
demanding, tough, uncompromising, but just wonderful, because he will make you look good. and he will fight for you to make sure that you're not compromised. And I did this movie with Peter. I did a lot of commercials and television with Peter, and the reason I was on House was because of Peter, and on Kidnapped, and on Elementary, and on The Unusuals, and a number of things. And Peter Fallon was just an extraordinary director and friend.
What year was that film? What year was it released?
Boy, I'm no good with names.
2002, I think.
I know Conrad Hall came to see the movie with me, and the deadly thing about Conrad is he'll tell you the truth. And he was crying by the end of the movie and saying, "Roy, this is your best photography." And I mean, getting that from the guy who did the Road to Perdition, and Cool Hand Luke, and Fat City, and all the great movies he did in his career, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I mean, he was a mentor as well. We were very good friends, and that meant a great deal to me. It's better than an Academy Award for me. And so,
I mean, you've had a few awards, and you're a member of the Art for Motion Picture and Sciences, and Oscar, and all that. You get to vote at the Oscars.
Yes. Yes.
Does that mean you get to vote in all categories, or do you only get to vote in the technical categories?
Our first vote, we have two votes. The first vote is for our technical category and for the best picture. The second time we vote is for everything. We vote for everything. That's the final vote. And I'm also a committee member on the Science and Technology Awards. So I vote for what technology is new and what needs to be awarded an Academy Award. I'm also a member of the Academy Student Film Awards and the Academy's Nicole Scholarship Awards, which is a very prestigious award given to writers who submit their scripts to the Academy for the Nichols Scholarship. And there's a sizable amount of money. I don't know how much it is, but there's a sizable amount of money that's awarded to the person that wins that award. And we get 3,000 submissions every year, and I'm one of the finalist judges. Right. So we read a lot of scripts, and I watched a lot of student films, 28 hours of student films. So it's an investment in time. But sure. Yes, I'm a member of the Academy. I'm not a member of the Television Academy. I was at one time. I don't respect the Television Academy. I have 2 Television Academy Awards and 4 nominations. I was nominated. I won for Beauty and the Beast, the pilot, and I won.
Is this the Emmys that you're talking about?
Yes, the Emmys. Right.
You're right.
And I won an Emmy for the pilot of Quantum Leap.
Okay.
And that's when I resigned from the Television Academy, because I didn't agree with their whole process. You have to nominate yourself, and then based upon that, people will look at your work. And I don't like the idea of nominating yourself.
That's very ego sort of and financially driven, I would.
And the truth is, I never voted for myself on the ones I won. The studios voted for me, and so I felt good about that I at least won them fair and square. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do that on later projects. I think I did try it on one other project, which I think was CSI, and it just felt wrong to me. So I probably would have more Emmys if I'd stayed in it, but I just didn't. It's too favored nations type of thing. I just don't like that.
I mean, there's been a lot of controversy around awards and how relevant the Oscars are now and things like that. And I've been involved in film festivals at the other end, the independent film festivals, the really small ones. And when I had my third feature film out a few years ago, I got offered a bribe for it to be the closing night film and for it to be picked as the best film by someone. I'm not going to say who. If you pay me this is what will happen. And I thought, well, I'd rather my film be chosen as the closing night film without me having to impart any cash. Thanks very much. That made me think, if that goes on at that end, at that scale, what happens at the other end, at the Oscars level? Because
I've never been offered a bribe, and I've been a member of the Academy for a very long time.
Sure.
And the one thing I do like about the Academy is you vote for your peers, and there's sometimes favoritism. I mean, but it's not like a group of people get together and say, "Hey, we're going to vote for this. You got to vote for that." I've never had that. Never heard that.
Right.
There are certainly times when you see that. Okay, well, this person didn't get an Oscar last year, and they're up this year. Okay, well, maybe we'll vote them in for this picture, which is maybe not as good. But of all the awards, it's the cleanest one I've found. And the Academy started as an offshoot of the studios, and it started as a way to placate craftspeople so that they wouldn't go on strike. Because there was no unions, and the Academy sort of broached itself as sort of a union or a way of protecting itself, and that went away in maybe the late 20s, early 30s, and it's become sort of I feel honored to be a member, and I'm happy that I'm a member, and there's so much more to the Motion Picture Academy than just the Oscars, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, I mean it's great to hear the level that you've given back and the work that you put in with things like submissions and also mentoring and helping other people's careers. I don't know if you've ever come across or met actor director Keith Gordon, who played Arnie in the film Christine, but you probably know who I mean. He was somebody who mentored me when I lived in Los Angeles and was trying to get a Kent State movie made. And he was someone that didn't have to give me his time. There was no benefit for Keith to read my scripts, and
that's the best kind of mentorship.
Yeah. So to hear that you're one of those kinds of people, I think speaks volumes.
I don't have a choice. My Harry Stradling did that to me, and all those people did it to me, and so I don't have a choice. I'm obliged to give it back, and I must tell you that the greatest joys I have are in seeing those people successful. The cinematographer that photographed the new movie The Wiz, Alice Brooks, I mentored her. I started her out, right. and she did Tick Tick Tick. And I mentored when she was 15 years old, started at 15 on Cracker. And that's where she said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a director of photography like Roy. So I feel really good about that. And there's plenty of other people I've helped as well. And so, that's almost better than a great movie that you've done.
And I dare say better than winning an award. This is Alice Brooks.
Yes, that's her.
Yeah, and I mean, she's already got a pretty substantial career.
Yeah.
So, 65 credits as a DOP and some pretty interesting things there. She's done The Walking Dead, and I'm actually interviewing Gail Ann Hurd, producer, next month. So I'll bring that up, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic stuff. Well, before we begin to wrap up, I would.
One other director I always wanted to work with,
sure,
and I never got a chance to. I met with him and several times. Alan Davio introduced me to him, and I really wanted to work with him. Our life's journeys are quite similar. That's Steven Spielberg. I mean, I was up for Always. And I was up for his television show, but I was not I had no seniority in the union, so they couldn't hire me.
That would have been, you would have been up for Amazing Stories, I think.
Yes, Amazing Stories, and it broke my heart because I really wanted to. I love him. I love his movies. They're enchanting. His very first movie he ever saw was The Greatest Show on Earth too, and so there's so many things that we have in common. It was too bad, but he's got a great cinematographer, so that's never going to happen. But I'm happy I got to meet him, and I'm happy that he still makes sometimes great movies.
Well, I'll see if I can get one of my connections to prod this video under his nose so he can compliment him in such a way. And I mean, I can't even quantify how much his films have influenced my life. I'd like to mention Ray Donavon quickly before we wrap up.
Yes.
It's one of the last things you worked on. Liev Schreiber is one of my favorite actors of all time. He started off very much as a character actor. Now he's a leading man in his own show, which is great. You also got the powerhouse character actor Eddie Marsan in this show, who's from the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Who, if I know Eddie, you probably hung out with him a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
That was not really my show. A friend of mine who I got into the ASC, Rob McLaughlin, was he was getting ready to direct some episodes. So I ended up directing, photographing 4 or 5 different episodes. So I wasn't the main director of photography, but I ended up doing about 4 or 5 episodes, I had great fun. I loved doing the show.
Sure.
But that was Rob's show. And all the actors were, John Voight was incredible, as was Liev and Eddie. Eddie was crazy. He was crazier than hell, and I love that about him.
He's got an amazing energy, Mark.
Yeah.
And incredible charisma. I mean, just brings something to a set. You can see it in any production he's in. So I'm so glad you got to be in the same.
He was great fun.
So a question I'd like to ask regarding this show, because it's a pretty recent show and established IP, what would you say, not necessarily specific to your role, but just in general terms of observation, would you say are the big differences between coming in and working on an established show as a guest DOP or a guest anybody today in sort of modern times, as opposed to sort of back in the day coming in on a show like Quantum Leap and being the guest DOP? Then is it business as usual? Is it much the same, or are there some fundamental differences? And if so, what? And are they for the better or worse?
Well, I've been very lucky in that people trust me and they allow me to do whatever I want to do. Certainly with Rob McLaughlin, he trusted me and respected me and allowed me to do what I wanted to do. But I do what the director wants to do. I am a chameleon. That's why I love doing different styles of shows. Is that I serve the director and I serve the writer and the actors. So it's not Roy Wagner coming in. It's a director of photography that's serving the show. There were a couple of other shows that I replaced the director of photography on, and I made it a policy that I would not do what they had done. I was going to do something different, and I was always embraced for that. And they ended up, the reason they let the other cinematographer go was that they ended up loving the way my style was in relation to them. So I've been very lucky in that I've not been told you have to follow this look or this style of the show. I've just been I've been trusted to do the work. And I respect Rob and I respect the look of that show. So I really tried to serve what he had done and serve the directors and serve that project. And it was fun not being Roy Wagner, but being somebody else. And I think that you can say that about virtually everything I've done. I've never come in as Roy Wagner. Right. I've always come in as a servant to serve the material serve the director, and serve the writing. Because to me, it's not about my style. I mean, I hope I don't have a style, but I suspect in looking at all my work, there is a signature. But I always try to fight against that. I want to be outside of my own box. That's the reason I left Party of Five, is because I found I was doing the same things over and over again. I went, oh, wait a second. I found the wall. I've got to get outside that wall. And that's why I left. And it's why I don't stay on shows. It's because I really get bored if you stay on them for too long.
I mean, funnily enough, my final question, and I think you just kind of answered it really, was, what would your advice be to young directors and young DOPs collaborating today? Because that word collaboration is key. That is what it is. I'm an actor's director myself on my own set, and I see my role primarily is to work with the actors. I tell the director the DOP what I'm after in the scene, and I want to hear his ideas about what the best way is to achieve that. We discuss it, and normally we discuss it, before we get to set, obviously prep as part of prep. But do you have a piece of advice regarding that collaboration for the younger generation?
I find a lot of today's work is a look at me style. Every cinematographer is trying to do a look at me, hey, I'm here style. I don't respect that.
That's interesting.
I want to serve the material. I want to serve the actors. I want to serve the director. That's why my work tends to be more organic. It's not, I don't want you to walk out of the theater saying, wow, what great cinematography. I want you to walk out of the theater saying, wow, what a great movie.
Yeah.
And that to me is, that's why I don't go in as Roy Wagner. I go in as a director of photography, serving that director. And because it's the best thing for me is meeting a new person that I've never worked with before, and they're going to teach me things I've never known before. They're going to find new ways for me to find my way out of the box. If you go in as a young director of photography or a young director, and you think you have all the answers, what you've done is you've built a box for yourself. And what's going to happen is as you grow is you'll be serving that box, what's inside that box, and you will never break out, and you'll never explore or find the things that you can do that you would have never done, because I've got to make sure I'm Roy Wagner. I'm inside this box. If you look at the movie Ripley, or the television series Ripley, Robert Elswit has been a cinematographer for years, but this work is outside of his milieu. It's outside of the things he's ever done. And that, to me, is the only reason to be a director or a director of photography or an actor or whomever, is because if you're going to be John Wayne the rest of your life, it's going to be a damn boring business. But if you're a young actor, a young director, young cinematographer, and you're trying to explore the potential of all the things that are in front of you, the location, what you hear whispered by a script supervisor or by a makeup artist or anything, if you allow yourself to be a muse, you're going to be extraordinarily successful. I mean, if you look at my early work in relation to my later work is much more complex and much more complicated. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to touch your intellect. I want to touch your heart. I want to touch your soul with the images, because the images are like music. They if you hear great music, it's great music. But if the music serves the material, you're not even aware of it. And that's what I want to do, and that's what I suggest for anyone that's making movies. And what I see today in television is they all look the same. They all have this orange glow to them, and they all have handheld work that has no purpose. To me, the camera is a character. It's got to serve the character that you're seeing. And if you're if you're moving the camera handheld, you're upstaging the performance of the actor. And if you're moving the Steadicam and you're conscious about it, then you're upstaging the material, the story that you're telling. To me, it all should be like the music. A camera move should either be like music, which draws you into or brings you out of something, or it should have intent. And that to me is the key. It's not where do you put the light. It's not what lens you use or what camera you use. It's what's the intent of the scene. What's the intent? What are those characters thinking subliminally? And I want to serve that.
That I think, damn, I'm just. It's not often I get speechless, but Roy, you've summed up an approach to a work ethic, both in your collaborative nature and the way you approach the material, which I think is rapidly becoming lost. And it's great that you've come on and you've said these things, because these are pearls of wisdom that should be hanging from young directors and DOP's ears. And I'm so grateful for the way you've articulated yourself this evening, because it's been not just enlightening, but also refreshing to hear someone who totally gets it. And we're told time and time again that story is king. And then I think a lot of people just think that only applies to script writers. And it's not true. It applies to the film full stop. Story is king.
Subtext is everything.
Yeah. And we have seen some real drivel on television lately, especially with some of the big IPs have produced some of the most globally disappointing shows ever. I don't want to mention them by name, but you can probably guess. And they've had monumental amounts of money spent on them as well, which beggars belief, frankly. You know, if there was a Roy Wagner approach to filmmaking course available, I'd recommend everyone to go on it. This has been fantastic. Wayne, you and I haven't had to say that much, really, because I've been hanging on Roy's every word. Have you got anything you want to add before we wrap up? And I'll just read this out quickly. Another great interview, Lance. Thanks, Roy, for sharing your experiences. Cheers from RRTNZ. And we've got several comments like that underneath from other people who've just come on. So, yeah, Wayne, sorry.
All I can say is you've seen tonight why I would have wanted to work with Roy, because, as I said, film history right there in this man. The stories alone, you know. And we go into a lot more of this in the book as well, you know, into a lot of Roy's movies into good detail. But no, I mean, Roy's the reason I do this, you know. His art inspired me to pick up the pen in the first place. So I owe him that. You know, I had that experience of being in the cinema in 1987 or 88, looking up and seeing the streams, wondering who's responsible for that. Here I am, you know, releasing a book with this man. He's just another one of these great artists who I feel deserves to be spoken about, written about. And it's a thrill for me to contribute to the literary element of film history with him, because it gives my words some credence and weight, I guess. All I can do is speculate, because I wasn't there. I can critique, I can comment, but to have Roy there to give me the facts and to give me the, you know, just his own perspective, which needs to be preserved, because, as you say, Lance, he's talking about things here tonight which are rapidly
vanishing
in contemporary film discourse. And I just think Roy's a treasure. And my job was just to work with him, was to put his thoughts, his perspective, and his art on paper. And I'm immeasurably glad that I've gotten to know him and become a friend of his and a collaborator.
Yeah, Roy, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you came on. And I don't think that just by reading your IMDb resume alone, that doesn't suggest even 1/10 of the experience that you've got in this in this industry, and have to say you've been one of the most incredible guests I've had to date, and I've had some amazing guests, and you know, we could carry on talking to what I would call David McGiffert proportions, who kept telling me one more story, and we were on for, kept saying, David, we've been on for quite a while now. It's Father's Day. Are you sure you don't want to go? Oh, wait, let me tell you this Christopher Lloyd story. So, but I might have to I might have to have you come back on and do a part 2, because
Okay.
so many other things I'd like to pick up on from what you've said.
Well, don't be discouraged about the movie industry, because you know the thing is that in the 60s we were bankrupt. The movie industry had collapsed as far as its technology and its means of expression, because we had an all brand new group of filmmakers coming in, and I think that's going to happen again. You know, once the young filmmakers have figured it out, and there's enough of people like me around to tell them good from bad. I think that once they get the hang of it, they'll fall back in love with movies and telling stories instead of being enchanted by their own photography or their own direction.
I'll have to send you a link to watch my last movie, so you can give me your feedback on it. I don't know if you ever met him, but the late great B-movie director Albert Poon, who did Sword and the Sorcerer, he was very kind with his time in terms of giving me feedback, and you know, it's those kind of words that I really cherish. I did have a question actually before we go. Something that you said earlier, I'm a little bit reluctant to ask it, but you're here, so I will. You mentioned that you'd served in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And of course, we had, after Platoon, we had a deluge of films about Vietnam. And the first time I went to the States, the very first taxi driver I got was a Vietnam vet. And he told me all kinds of stories. He was driving me around Florida to Disney World and all this kind of thing. And I got his number, and he was my taxi guy the whole time I was there. I wondered, based on what he told me, I'm taking it that you weren't flooding to watch those movies yourself, based on your time. So you wouldn't have seen one that you said it was like that. You just...
No, not really. I mean, Platoon probably is closest to it, but you know, I was in the Air Force, so I was not a grunt. I was not a grunt on the ground. I was I'm a combat photographer. I mean, that I'm considered a combat photographer, but you know, I was not on the ground, and so I don't have anything to complain about. But what I have to complain about is we should never have been there.
No, absolutely.
And there's plenty of my friends that feel the same way, but you know, it's what we had to do. We had to serve our country, and we did it. And you know, it's so time out of my life that I regret. But also, there's things that happen with the Colonel that helped me have the time in Hollywood and helped me with Ansel Adams. I would have never have had that otherwise. So. You know, everything is a journey and it has its purpose. And I guess that's part of my journey. And one thing I did learn is that from that is structure and discipline, which I hated at the time, but it served me well as far as managing crews.
Yeah.
It's helped me a lot with that, because you don't have to be an asshole to be a drill sergeant. You just have to, they have to believe that they can they can go home at night and be safe. Yeah. And that's the same whether you're at war in a battlefield or at war in a movie studio, because there's a great deal of similarity. The only difference is in Vietnam, you knew who your enemies were. In Hollywood, you don't know who your enemies are.
Yeah, that's and they definitely don't come at you from the front.
No.
I've had my own experiences of that. Well,
look, of course.
Roy, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for coming on.
You're welcome.
This has been an incredible time. And just to hear that you were on set with people like Alfred Hitchcock, Ed Wood, no less, John Ford, you got to see some bits of movies like How the West Was Won being filmed when you were a kid. It's an incredible journey.
It's a mad, mad world, a bunch of films.
Yeah, that's another one of my my favorite films. In fact, my friend Retro just did a massive video about that on her YouTube channel the other day. I've got to have you back, Wayne. Thank you so much for setting this up. Guys, do check out the links for both of the books. Got a fantastic book that Roy and Wayne wrote together. I will add any additional links that I've missed as soon as I get off this stream. And of course, you've also got Wayne's book on the whole Elm Street franchise, to which
it's a great book. It's a great book.
I have it somewhere.
You know, here's the funny thing about that book. I was on that set, but in reading his book, I felt like I was on that set. So anybody that reads that book actually will feel like they were actually there.
Right.
That is the highest praise. I can't thank you enough for it.
Well, there you go. So if you want the immersive Elm Street set experience, you've got to buy that book. They're both available on Amazon now. Jamal Ahmed just put in the chat, I'm going straight back to the beginning. Thanks, everyone, because he missed the beginning of the stream. So
actually, another one that you didn't talk about is Nicky McLean's book, which is really an incredible book about a person's journey. I mean, he had an incredible journey that's totally different than mine. And he did get to work with Steven Spielberg and a lot of other people I admire. And I have a great deal of admiration for him as well. So you need to get 3 books. And Nicky McLean's book is exceptional. I just love that book. That's how we got introduced.
Yeah, Nick McLean, who is a cinematographer, another book that Wayne has done. And Wayne's got several books on Amazon. Do check them all out.
Nicky was just the camera operator in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah.
Only he could have done that shot where the camera goes through the car and out the other end on a 2x4. I mean, you know, he did some amazing Goonies, extraordinary work.
Incredible.
And, yeah, so he can talk to you in a very different way than I can.
I think also he's another collaborator of John Badham's, I believe.
Yes.
Short Circuit, and he worked on War Games as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did actually try to get Nick on for an interview about a year ago, and he lives in a really weird communications black spot where we tried Zoom, we couldn't get Zoom to work. We tried a Facebook call, we couldn't get that to work.
I have to say, you know, Roy brings up Nick. It's one of in all my years of doing this, all my years as a film fan and then as a film writer. Last year, I was over in Malibu, and Nick put this party together for me, you know, to thank me or whatever for coming over and doing the book and all that. And Roy was one of the guests, and there was all these other people. You couldn't walk, 2 feet without bumping into somebody whose work I grew up with and was immeasurably in awe of. And it was just so incredible, and it reminded me of one of the reasons why I do this book. It's probably the best reason for doing this. It's the people you meet, and I'm sure Roy can attest to this, being a cinematographer and growing up a film fan and meeting his heroes. The friendships you make because of the art is the greatest thing.
You all become carnies. You're like gypsies. You're all part of the same camp. Even if you've never met before, when you meet for the first time, it's like you've known each other forever because you've somehow been connected 6 degrees of separation, and you know each other. I've known Nicky forever, but not known Nicky. And it's a tiny little community, or it used to be a tiny little community, and we all take care of each other.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, I feel like I've kept you on way over time already. We're coming up for nearly 2 hours now. But look, every minute of this has been amazing. Do check out the book on Nick McLean. You can see him there shooting that infamous scene from The Deer Hunter. Another man with a very rich and interesting career. Roy, I hope I get to meet you in person one day.
Me too. I'm here.
Until then, thanks very much. Everyone that's watched and commented, thank you for your comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm nearly at 4,000 subscribers now. Been doing this for just over 2 years. This is interview 73, and I'm hoping to interview 100 before the end of the year. So, and Wayne's been instrumental in at least half a dozen of those. Roy, thanks ever so much. Wayne, thank you very much. Everybody watching the stream, really do appreciate it. don't forget what I always say. Make sure that you check on the people that you care about and remind them that you love them. And trust me, if they're my age, a phone call never goes amiss. Sod all this texting business. Give them a ring. Check they're all right. Until then, we'll catch you all again.